And what if everything we think we know about the dawn of civilization is completely wrong? What if the first cities, the first temples, the first written records weren't the beginning at all, but merely the point where a much older memory finally found a way to preserve itself? We've been taught to believe in a neat, linear, and orderly progression of history. First came the hunter-gatherers, small nomadic groups following herds of animals across wild landscapes. Then came agriculture, the revolutionary discovery that seeds could be planted and harvested. With agriculture came settlement, and with settlement arose the first villages. Villages grew into towns, and towns blossomed into cities. These cities then developed writing, organized religion, mathematics, and astronomy, and thus civilization was born. It's an elegant narrative, a compelling story that just makes sense. It progresses from the simple to the complex, from the primitive to the sophisticated. But there's a problem. The archaeological evidence just doesn't fit neatly into this picture. There are pieces that don't belong, fragments that don't fit into any known puzzle. And there's a region of the world where these anomalies are concentrated with a disturbing density. Mesopotamia, the land between two rivers, the supposed cradle of civilization. But what archaeologists have unearthed in recent decades suggests that Mesopotamia wasn't the beginning, but rather a reboot, a fresh start written upon the ashes of something that came before. Something that, according to our accepted timelines, shouldn't have existed at all. Something that the Sumerians themselves, in their oldest texts, described as a world before the flood. Tonight, we're going to delve deep into that lost world. We're going to explore the millennia that preceded the first Sumerian cities. We're going to follow the faint footprints of forgotten cultures, cultures whose names we've painstakingly reconstructed from fragments of pottery and the foundations of temples buried beneath layers of sediment. We're going to seek answers to questions we perhaps should never have asked because there's something unsettling hidden in the soil of Mesopotamia, something that archaeologists unearthed. Something that has changed everything we thought we knew. And tonight, we're going to uncover what that something is. Namera. Chapter 1. The Temple That Shouldn't Exist. In southeastern Turkey, about 15 kilometers from the city of Sanliurfa, lies a hill that the locals call Göbekli. In Turkish, it means Potbelly Hill or Navel Hill. For centuries, the farmers of the region avoided this place. They said there was something strange about the stones that protruded from the ground, that they weren't natural stones, that someone had placed them there. In 1963, a team of American archaeologists conducted a superficial reconnaissance of the area as part of a broader regional survey. They noticed the stones but quickly dismissed them, believing they were simply the tombstones from a medieval Byzantine cemetery. Nothing important, nothing that warranted a full-scale excavation. The report was filed away, and the hill was forgotten. More than 3 decades passed. In 1994, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt was working on a project nearby when he decided to visit the site he'd read about in those old reports. He climbed the hill as dusk settled over the mountains of Immerse. What he saw took his breath away. These weren't medieval tombstones. They were massive pillars of carved limestone, decorated with reliefs of animals that seemed to be staring back at him from across the millennia. Foxes with outstretched tails, boars with menacing tusks, snakes intertwined in intricate patterns, scorpions with raised stingers, vultures with outstretched wings, and shapes that seemed almost human, but not quite. Stylized figures in the shape of a T that represented something Schmidt couldn't quite put his finger on. The following year, excavations began. What emerged from the earth would rewrite the textbooks on human prehistory. Göbekli was built approximately 12,000 years ago, between 9600 and 800 BCE. To put this in perspective, that's 7,000 years older than the first Sumerian cities. The 7,000 years older than Stonehenge. It's older than established agriculture, older than pottery, older than metallurgy, and older than any known form of writing. According to everything we thought we knew about human evolution, Göbekli shouldn't exist. At that time, according to the traditional narrative, humans were hunter-gatherers, nomadic people living in small family groups. They followed the seasonal migrations of animals, gathering fruits and roots as they went. They had no permanent settlements, no monumental architecture, and certainly not the social organization necessary for large-scale construction projects. And yet, There it stood, a complex of circular structures, each ringed with those massive T-shaped pillars, some weighing up to 16 tons apiece. The pillars were quarried from limestone outcrops hundreds of meters away, transported without the aid of wheels or domesticated draft animals, and erected with incredible mathematical precision. Then they were carved, using only stone tools, into three-dimensional reliefs of an artistic quality that wouldn't be seen again for millennia. To date, only about 5% of the site has been excavated. Ground-penetrating radar has revealed that there are at least another 15 or 20 stone circles buried beneath the surface. Göbekli Tepe is not an isolated temple. It's a massive complex, possibly the oldest ceremonial center in the world. Schmidt proposed a theory that turned everything archaeologists thought they knew on its head. First came the temple, then the city. Traditionally, it was thought that religion and temples were a product of civilization. First, humans developed agriculture, then they formed permanent settlements, then they developed complex social structures, and only then did they build temples. Göbekli Tepe suggests the exact opposite. The need to create sacred spaces, to gather for rituals, to construct monuments that transcended individual lives, preceded everything else. And this need to gather, to work together on a common project, may have been the very catalyst that led to agriculture, to permanent settlements, to civilization itself. But there's something even more unsettling about Göbekli Tepe. After approximately 1,600 years of use, the entire complex was deliberately buried. Layer upon layer of sediment was carefully packed around the pillars. It wasn't abandoned and forgotten. It was intentionally preserved as if someone wanted to protect it, as if someone knew that a time would come when it would be necessary to remember. The motifs carved into the pillars of Göbekli Tepe are a catalogue of the wildlife of the era. Foxes, boars, gazelles, deer, onagers, snakes, scorpions, spiders, vultures, cranes. Some animals are depicted with extraordinary realism, with anatomical details that show an intimate knowledge of their forms and behaviors. Others are stylized, reduced to geometric shapes that seem more like symbols than representations. There are figures that defy interpretation, human hands carved in relief, figures that could be severed heads, animals in postures that seem to tell stories we can no longer read. And in the center of each circle, two pillars are larger than the others, facing each other as if in conversation or confrontation. What did it all mean? What rituals were performed in these stone circles? What beliefs motivated hundreds of people to work together for generations to create something so monumental? Klaus Schmidt believed that Göbekli Tepe was a pilgrimage center, a sacred place where groups of hunter-gatherers from all over the region came to participate in ceremonies. The stone tools found at the site show styles from different cultural traditions, as if people from diverse communities gathered here periodically. And the symbols carved on the pillars of Göbekli Tepe, those animals, those geometric patterns, reappear thousands of years later in Sumeria. The intertwined serpents, the scorpions with raised tails, the vultures with outstretched wings. They are the same motifs, as if there were a cultural continuity, a transmission of knowledge across 7 millennia. Who built Göbekli Tepe and what was it that they wanted to preserve? Chapter 2. The People of Painted Pottery. To understand what happened in Mesopotamia before written history, we need to follow the trail of pottery. It may seem like a mundane subject, but fragments of baked clay are the fingerprints of vanished cultures. Each people, each period, each cultural tradition had its own way of forming, decorating, and firing its vessels. And by studying these patterns, archaeologists have been able to reconstruct a sequence of civilizations that extends much further back than we ever imagined. The first of these forgotten cultures is known as Hassuna. It took its name from the site of Tel Hassuna in northern Iraq, where its remains were first excavated. The Hassuna people lived between approximately 6,000 and 5,000 BCE. They were the first farmers of northern Mesopotamia. They had settled in the foothills of the mountains, where there was enough rainfall to allow for dryland farming. Hassuna villages were small, with mud brick houses of 3 or 4 rooms built around central courtyards. Ovens for baking bread, silos for storing grain, stone tools for harvesting cereals, and the bones of domesticated animals reveal a diet based on sheep, goats, and pigs. They lived modest lives, working the land, raising animals, and making pottery decorated with linear designs in reddish paint on a cream background. There's no evidence of monumental temples at Hasuna sites, no clear signs of social hierarchy or class differentiation. They were egalitarian communities of related families who shared a common culture defined by their distinctive pottery. But the Hasuna were not alone in the region. At the same time, in the drier plains of central Iraq, another culture known as Samara was flourishing. The Samarans were more sophisticated in some respects. Their pottery displayed more elaborate designs, including complex geometric figures and stylized representations of animals and humans. And, most importantly, they had developed primitive irrigation systems that allowed them to farm in areas where rainfall was insufficient. The Samara culture represents a crucial step in the history of Mesopotamia. It's the first evidence that humans were manipulating the flow of water to expand arable land. This technology would be fundamental to the later development of civilization in the alluvial plains of the south, where rainfall was scarce, but the Tigris and Euphrates rivers provided abundant water. And then there was the Halaf culture. The Halaf people lived between approximately 6,000 and 5,400 BCE, spreading throughout northern Mesopotamia from Turkey to Iraq. Their name comes from the site of Tel Halaf in northern Syria, where the archaeologist Max von Oppenheim conducted excavations between 1911 and 1927. Halaf pottery is extraordinary. It's so fine, so beautifully decorated, that when the first specimens reached European museums, many experts refused to believe they could be so old. The designs are intricate geometric patterns painted in multiple colors on thin-walled vessels fired at surprisingly high temperatures. There are plates and bowls with decorations that resemble mandalas, symmetrical patterns of hypnotic complexity. The Halaf also created the first known seals in the Near East. Small pieces of carved stone with geometric designs were pressed onto wet clay to leave a distinctive mark. These seals suggest concepts of private property, personal identity, and transactions that needed to be authenticated. They are indicators of a society more complex than its material technology would suggest. But perhaps the most significant thing about the Halaf culture is its geographic reach. The same distinctive pottery appears at sites separated by hundreds of kilometers. This indicates a network of contacts, of trade, of cultural exchange that spanned an immense region. The Halaf people were not isolated villages. They were part of something larger, a shared cultural sphere that extended from the Mediterranean to the mountains of Iran. How did they communicate across these distances? What united them? What beliefs did they share? These questions have no definitive answers. The Halaf culture left no written texts, only pottery, seals, figurines, and the foundations of their distinctive circular houses called tholoi. And then, around 5000 BCE, the Halaf culture disappears. There are no signs of destruction, no violence, no evidence of invasion. Simply, over a relatively short period, Halaf pottery ceases to be produced and is replaced by a new style, the Ubaid style. Chapter 3: The Awakening of the South. For millennia, southern Mesopotamia was an inhospitable place. The alluvial plains between the Tigris and Euphrates were vast swamps, marshlands that flooded with the spring meltwater and dried under the scorching summer sun. There was no stone for building, no wood for fuel. The climate was extreme, with summer temperatures exceeding 40 degrees Celsius and almost no rainfall outside of brief, seasonal showers. As we explore this mystery of the lost civilizations of Mesopotamia, I would love to know from which part of the world you are joining us on this nightly journey. Are you in Spain, following in the footsteps of the people who crossed the Mediterranean in ancient times, or perhaps in Latin America, where other civilizations arose with similar enigmas? Leave your comment below, telling me your location. I am fascinated to imagine how this account of the first world reaches corners of the entire planet as the night advances. And yet, it was in this seemingly hostile landscape that something extraordinary was born. Geologists and climatologists have reconstructed the conditions that existed in southern Mesopotamia during the Ubaid period. It wasn't the desert we see today. It was a world of water. Vast lagoons, meandering rivers, reed beds that stretched to the horizon. Sea levels were higher, and the Persian Gulf extended much further inland than it does today. In this aquatic environment, communities of fishermen and reed gatherers had lived for millennia, adapting to a unique ecosystem. They built their houses on platforms of woven reeds. They navigated the natural channels in reed boats, hunted waterfowl, and caught fish with nets and traps. It was a way of life that required specialized skills and a deep understanding of the environment. When the Ubaid people appeared in the archaeological record, they incorporated these aquatic traditions but added something new: large-scale irrigation agriculture. They learned to control the waters that had once controlled them. They built dikes, dug canals, and created systems to store and distribute water, transforming the wild marshlands into cultivated fields and organized villages. This process of domesticating the landscape didn't happen overnight. It took generations of experimentation, of trial and error, of accumulated and transmitted knowledge. But the result was a radical transformation. Where before there had been only water and reeds, permanent communities arose, with temples, storehouses, and an increasingly complex social organization. The Ubaid culture appeared in southern Mesopotamia around 6,500 BCE. Its name comes from the small mound of Tel al-Ubaid, near the ruins of the ancient city of Ur, where the British archaeologists Henry Hall and Leonard Woolley excavated the first specimens of its characteristic pottery in the early decades of the 20th century. What makes the Ubaid culture special is not only its antiquity, it's what it represents for the first time in human history. We see the emergence of a pattern that will become the basis of all subsequent civilizations. The Ubaid people built the first permanent temples of Mesopotamia. At sites like Eridu, Tel el-Wali, Ur, and Uruk, archaeologists have discovered religious structures that were rebuilt again and again in the same location for centuries, each new version larger and more elaborate than the last. These were not simple domestic chapels. They were public buildings intended for communal worship, focal points of social and religious life. The Ubaid also developed irrigation systems more sophisticated than any that had existed before: canals that carried water from the rivers to distant fields, dikes that controlled floods, and sluice gates that regulated the flow. This technology transformed unproductive marshlands into fertile agricultural lands that could feed increasingly large populations. And for the first time, we see clear evidence of occupational specialization. Not everyone in an Ubaid village did the same thing. There were artisans specializing in pottery production, others dedicated to weaving, others to nascent metallurgy, and there were people who seemed to be dedicated exclusively to religious activities, possibly the first priests in human history. Ubaid pottery is distinctive and easy to recognize. These are cream or greenish-colored vessels decorated with geometric designs painted in dark tones. Triangles, wavy lines, and zigzag patterns. Unlike the elaborate Halaf pottery, the Ubaid vessels have a simpler aesthetic. More utilitarian, more standardized. This suggested production on a larger scale, possibly for commercial exchange, in addition to domestic use. It wasn't just about making pots for the kitchen anymore. The Ubaid were churning these things out, hinting at a developing trade network, a system of exchange that would soon become the lifeblood of Mesopotamia. What's most surprising about the Ubaid culture is its expansion. It wasn't just a local fad. This was a cultural phenomenon, a slow-burn revolution that would reshape the ancient world. From its origin in southern Mesopotamia, the Ubaid style gradually spread northward, absorbing or replacing local traditions. Imagine a ripple effect, the Ubaid culture emanating outward, subtly transforming everything it touched. The Halaf pottery disappeared not because its people were conquered or destroyed, but because they adopted the Ubaid culture. No swords or battles, just a cultural shift. They integrated into a broader system, into a way of life that seemed to offer advantages that the previous traditions did not provide. It was like upgrading to a better software. The Ubaid offered efficiency, connection, and a promise of a more prosperous future. To the east, the Ubaid people reached as far as the coasts of the Persian Gulf. Archaeologists have found Ubaid pottery in sites in Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. Picture those early mariners, setting sail in their primitive vessels, trading Ubaid pottery for goods from distant lands. This indicates that the seafaring Ubaid built boats and used them to trade along the coasts of the Gulf. They were the ancient world's traveling salesmen, spreading their culture and wares wherever they went. The H3 site in Kuwait has provided the oldest known evidence of maritime navigation in the world. It's a testament to their ingenuity and their willingness to explore the unknown, to venture out onto the open sea in search of new opportunities. To the west, the Ubaid influence reached as far as Syria, and to the north as far as the mountains of Anatolia. In each place, the local culture was transformed by contact with the Ubaid pattern. Not erased, but transformed. Temples, pottery, and funerary practices. Everything began to resemble each other. For the first time in human history, a relatively uniform culture extended over an immense geographical region. Imagine the power of a single cultural idea to spread so far, connecting disparate communities in a web of shared beliefs and practices. This did not happen by military conquest. There is no evidence that the Ubaid were warriors. No conquering armies or brutal sieges. It happened by something more subtle, more profound. It was a cultural takeover, a silent revolution that spread through trade, migration, and the simple allure of a better way of life. It happened because the Ubaid system worked, produced agricultural surpluses, allowed specialization, and created exchange networks that benefited all participants. Think of it as the first globalized economy, a system of interconnectedness that fueled growth and prosperity. It was, in a sense, the first integrated economic system in history. No longer isolated villages, but a network of communities exchanging goods, ideas, and technologies. And at the heart of this system, at the extreme southern end of the arable lands, near where the fresh waters of the Euphrates met the salty waters of the Persian Gulf, there was a city that the Sumerians themselves, thousands of years later, would remember as the place where it all began. Eridu Chapter 4. The First City in the World. A title that echoes through the ages. Eridu in Sumerian was written Nun-Ki, which means mighty city or city of wisdom. They believed it was a place of beginnings. The Sumerians called it the first of all cities, the place where civilization had descended from the sky. Not just a boast, but a deeply held belief that this was where humanity's journey truly began. It was not empty rhetoric. For them, Eridu had a profound, almost mystical significance. It was more than just a city. It was a sacred place, a connection to the divine. It was the place where the gods had first touched the earth, where the celestial and the terrestrial met. The site of Eridu, known today as Tel Abu Sharain, is located about 12 miles southwest of the ruins of Ur, in the far south of Iraq. A place that once teemed with life, now a desolate reminder of a glorious past. When the first archaeologists arrived at this place in the 19th century, they found a desolate landscape of sand and scrub, with no apparent trace of the greatness that the ancient texts described. They must have wondered if the legends were just fairy tales. But beneath the surface, waiting to be discovered, was one of the most important archaeological sequences in human history. A treasure trove of knowledge, buried beneath the sands of time. Systematic excavations began in 1946, led by the Iraqi archaeologist Fuad Safar and the British archaeologist Seton Lloyd. Their names should be remembered as the discoverers of a lost world. What they found exceeded all expectations. Each dig deeper revealed a piece of the puzzle. Beneath the remains of an unfinished ziggurat from the 3rd millennium BC, they discovered layer upon layer of earlier temples, 18 levels of superimposed construction, each representing a reconstruction or expansion of the previous temple. The archaeologists painstakingly peeled back the layers of time, revealing the secrets of Eridu's past. And the deepest levels dated back to the Ubaid period, to the 5th millennium BC. A journey back in time to the dawn of civilization. The oldest temple in Eridu, level 18, was a modest structure, a small room of approximately 13 by 16 feet, built with sun-dried mud bricks. A humble beginning for a place that would become a cradle of civilization. It had a niche in one wall where a statue of worship was probably placed and a small pedestal or altar in front of the niche. The gods were present, even in this modest shrine. On the floor, the archaeologists found remains of offerings, fish bones, and ashes scattered around the altar. It was a place of ritual, of sacrifice, of communion with the divine. This simple room built approximately 7,500 years ago is the oldest known temple in Mesopotamia, a place of profound historical significance. And what makes it even more significant is that it was built in the same place over and over again for more than 15 years, a testament to the enduring power of tradition and belief. Each generation rebuilt the temple on the foundations of the previous one, making it larger, more elaborate. A continuous act of devotion, a desire to honor the gods and preserve their legacy. The original cult niche became a central cella. The small room was transformed into a complex of ceremonial halls. The shrine evolved over time, reflecting the changing needs and beliefs of the people. And eventually, the mound of rubble from the previous constructions became an elevated platform, a physical manifestation of the city's growth and its spiritual significance. The first ziggurat in history, the prototype for the monumental structures that would dominate the Mesopotamian landscape for millennia to come. The god of Eridu was Enki, later known by the Akkadians as Ea. He was the master of the fresh water that flows beneath the earth, the god of wisdom, magic, the arts, and the sciences. A benevolent deity, a protector of humankind. His temple was called Iabzu, the house of the aquatic abyss, because it was believed that beneath the temple was the Abzu, the ocean of subterranean fresh water that fed all the springs and rivers of the world. A source of life, a symbol of knowledge, a connection to the divine. Enki was a peculiar god in the Mesopotamian pantheon, a deity of unparalleled power and wisdom. Unlike other deities who appeared distant and capricious, Enki was described as a benefactor of humanity, a friend to mortals, a guide through the challenges of life. It was he who had taught humans the arts of civilization, agriculture, writing, mathematics, engineering, all gifts from Enki. It was he who had protected them when other gods wanted to destroy them, a champion of humankind, a defender against the wrath of the heavens. And it was he who had created the 7 sages, the Apkallu, semi-divine beings who emerged from the sea to transmit knowledge to mortals. Messengers from the deep, bearers of wisdom, teachers of humankind. Enki's temple in Eridu was not just a place of worship. It was the center of an entire cosmology, the spiritual heart of the Sumerian world. The Sumerians believed that in the beginning of time, before the cities existed, before the humans knew how to cultivate or build, the knowledge had descended from the sky to Eridu. A divine revelation, a moment of enlightenment that transformed human existence. The royalty had begun there. The first kings, divinely appointed rulers, emerged from Eridu to lead humankind. Civilization was born there. From humble beginnings, the seeds of civilization were sown in Eridu's fertile soil. Everything that the Sumerians knew and everything that they were dated back to that sacred place in the marshes of the south. A place of origins, a source of identity, a connection to the past. But Eridu was not only important for religious reasons, it was also a center of technological innovation, the birthplace of many of the inventions and discoveries that would shape the course of human history. Archaeologists have discovered that during the Ubaid period, Eridu functioned as an important center of ceramic production, a hub of industry, a place of skilled craftsmanship, a testament to human ingenuity. Kilns, cooking waste, and large quantities of ceramic fragments have been found indicating production on an industrial scale for the time. The sounds of the potter's wheel, the glow of the kilns, these were the sounds and sights of Eridu's prosperity. The inhabitants of Eridu were also pioneers in construction techniques with mud bricks. They were masters of their craft, skilled builders who transformed the landscape with their creations. They developed methods for manufacturing bricks of standardized dimensions, which allowed for larger and more stable constructions. They were the architects of their own destiny, building a city that would endure for millennia. This technical knowledge would later spread throughout Mesopotamia and become the basis of the architecture of all the later Mesopotamian civilizations. The legacy of Eridu lived on in the grand temples and palaces of later empires. The location of Eridu was not accidental either. It was strategically positioned. It was situated on the edge of the marshes, at a point where the fresh water of the Euphrates met the brackish waters of the Persian Gulf. A gateway to the world, a bridge between cultures. This position made it a natural commercial node, a place where products from the highlands of the north could be exchanged for maritime goods from the south, shells from the Gulf, dried fish, bitumen for waterproofing boats. A bustling marketplace, a crossroads of trade, a center of exchange. All this flowed through Eridu. The city thrived on its strategic location and its role as a hub of commerce. And there was something more. In the surrounding waters, freshwater fish swam that the inhabitants considered sacred. A connection to the divine, a source of spiritual nourishment. Offerings of bones of carp and other species have been found in the oldest levels of the temple. These fish were not just food. They were messengers from the gods. For the inhabitants of Eridu, fish were not only food. They were messengers of the god Enki, creatures of the aquatic abyss that connected the world of mortals with the realm of underground wisdom. Symbols of knowledge, intermediaries between the human and divine realms. This association between fish, water, and divine wisdom would become one of the most persistent themes in Mesopotamian mythology. A recurring motif, a constant reminder of the city's sacred origins. The Apkallu, the sages who taught civilization to humans, were frequently represented with fish characteristics. They were not just wise men. They were beings of extraordinary power and knowledge. They emerged from the water to transmit knowledge and returned to the abyss when their mission was complete. They were the teachers of humankind, the bringers of civilization. As if the sea itself were the source of all wisdom and Eridu in its position between the waters were the point where that wisdom touched the earth. A place of divine inspiration, a source of endless knowledge. But here is the question that the Sumerian texts force us to formulate. A question that has haunted scholars for generations. If Eridu was the beginning, where did the knowledge that was transmitted there come from? The ultimate mystery, the enigma at the heart of civilization. If the Apkallu taught civilization to humans, who taught the Apkallu? Who were the teachers of the teachers, the source of their wisdom? The Sumerians themselves had an answer, a response that has baffled scholars for more than a century. Chapter 5. The Seven Sages of the Abyss. The key to unlocking the secrets of the past. In the oldest texts of Mesopotamia, there are references to beings called Abgalkalu in Akkadian or Abgal in Sumerian. Mysterious figures, shrouded in myth and legend. They were seven sages, antediluvian teachers, semi-divine creatures that had existed before the Great Flood, which according to the months had swept the world in remote times. Survivors of a cataclysmic event, guardians of ancient knowledge. Their description is extraordinary and disturbing. Their appearance defies easy categorization. The Apkallu were represented in three distinct ways in Mesopotamian art, each representation offering a different perspective on their nature. Some appeared as men with fish skin, with the head of the fish on their own head, like a hood, and the tail hanging down their backs. Bizarre figures, part human, part fish, symbols of their connection to the watery realm. Others were shown as beings with the head of an eagle and the body of a human, with wings that allowed them to ascend to the sky. Soaring beings, bridging the gap between earth and heaven. And still others appeared in completely human form, but with distinctive clothing that marked them as different from ordinary mortals. Dressed in elaborate robes, symbols of their status and their connection to the divine. The most famous of these sages was Wana, known in later Greek sources as Oannes. His name echoed through the ages, a testament to his enduring legacy. According to the tradition preserved by the Babylonian priest Barroso in the 3rd century BC, Oannes was an extraordinary creature with a fish body, but a man's head, hands, and feet beneath his aquatic form. A mythical being, a blend of the human and the animal worlds. He emerged from the Persian Gulf at dawn and spent the days teaching the humans who lived on the coasts. A messenger from the deep, a teacher of civilization. What did he teach them? Everything. According to Barroso, Oannes instructed humanity in writing, in mathematics, in geometry, in agriculture, in architecture, in laws, in the establishment of territorial boundaries, in the sowing and harvesting of cereals. The foundations of civilization, the tools necessary for human progress. In short, he taught them all the arts of civilization. He was the ultimate teacher, the source of all knowledge. And when night fell, Oan submerged back into the sea, because he was an amphibious being who could not survive permanently on dry land. A creature of two worlds, bound to the sea, yet drawn to the land. During the reigns of the 7 antediluvian kings, the 7 Apkallu served as advisors. They were the power behind the throne, the source of wisdom and guidance. Each wise man was associated with a specific king and with a specific city. A bond of loyalty, a commitment to the city's welfare. Tradition linked them with the founding of the 7 oldest cities of Sumeria: Eridu, Uar, Nippur, Kulab, Kesh, Lagash, and Shuruppak. They were the founders of civilization, the architects of the Sumerian world. They were not just teachers, they were the architects of civilization itself, those who had established the plans according to which human society should be organized. They were the planners, the builders, the architects of the Sumerian world. There is an Akkadian text known as Bit Mezeri, the protected house, which is an exorcism ritual designed to ward off evil from homes. A powerful spell, a defense against the forces of darkness. In this text, a list of the 7 Apkallu appears with their names and characteristics, their identities revealed, their powers invoked. The 7th and last of them, Uabzu, is described in a particularly meaningful way. A figure of great significance, a symbol of hope. It is said that he ascended to heaven. His fate set him apart from his peers. He did not die as humans died. He was elevated to the celestial realms. A divine reward, a sign of his exceptional virtue. This story has unsettling parallels with other traditions. A connection between different cultures, a shared belief in the power of the divine. The biblical patriarch Enoch, who was the 7th from Adam, was also elevated to heaven without experiencing death. His story echoed across the millennia, and Enoch in later Jewish traditions was described as the first man to learn writing, astronomy, and other arts of knowledge. A parallel that could not be ignored. The similarities are too specific to be coincidental. A link between different traditions, a shared heritage of ancient wisdom. Scholars have debated for decades about the nature of the Apkallu, a topic of endless discussion, a puzzle that refuses to be solved. For some, they are simply mythological figures, products of the human imagination, symbols of the natural world, personifications of the gradual process through which humans developed the technologies of civilization, an allegorical representation of human progress. For others, they represent a cultural memory of real teachers, perhaps members of a more advanced culture who came into contact with more primitive peoples and transmitted knowledge to them. Messengers from a distant land, bringers of new technologies and ideas. And for still others, they are evidence of something more mysterious, something that our modern categories of thought cannot adequately explain. A mystery that defies logic, a phenomenon that challenges our understanding of reality. What we know for sure is that the months firmly believed in the reality of these sages. Their faith was unwavering, their belief absolute. They were represented in stone reliefs that decorated palaces and temples. Their images adorned the walls of the most important buildings in the Sumerian world. They placed figurines of Apkallu in the foundations of buildings to protect them. Guardian spirits, protectors of the city, symbols of their power and influence. They invoked their names in healing and purification rituals. The power of their names invoked to heal the sick and cleanse the impure. For them, the Apkallu were not characters in a fairy tale, they were the founders of everything they knew. The architects of their civilization, the source of their knowledge. And there was something more, a secret that lay hidden beneath the surface. The Apkallu were described as the guardians of knowledge prior to the flood, the preservers of the past, the keepers of ancient wisdom. They had preserved the wisdom of the ancient world through the catastrophe. Their actions ensured the survival of human knowledge. They had transmitted that knowledge to later humanity so that it would not be lost forever. A noble task, a selfless act. They were, in a sense, archaeologists of a lost era, diggers of a memory that went back to unthinkable times. Their actions preserved knowledge from before a cataclysm. What memory was that? Where did it come from? To find answers, we need to examine what the Sumerians believed about the world before the flood. A journey into the distant past, a quest to uncover the secrets of a lost world. Chapter 6. The World Before the Flood. A world of gods and heroes, of kings and sages, a world lost to time. The List of Sumerian Kings. One of the most extraordinary documents that antiquity has left us. A treasure trove of historical information. It is a chronological record that attempts to list all the rulers who ruled Sumeria from the beginning of time. A comprehensive account of the rulers of Sumer, a record of their deeds and their legacies. The most complete version is found in the Londal Prism, a piece of clay approximately 8 inches high with 4 faces inscribed in cuneiform writing, currently preserved in the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford. A priceless artifact, a window into the past. The document begins with words that have resonated through the millennia. Words that speak of origins and beginnings. After royalty descended from heaven, royalty was inherited. A statement of profound significance, a claim to divine authority. What follows is a list of 8 kings who ruled before the flood. Their names are etched in stone. Their reigns are measured in units called sars of 3,600 years, nas of 600 years, and sozas of 60 years. Time measured on a scale that defies human comprehension. The resulting figures are astronomical. The numbers defy human understanding. The first king Alulim of Eridu reigned for 2,800 years. A reign of unimaginable length, a testament to his power and his wisdom. The second Algar, also of Eridu, reigned for 36,000 years. His reign was legendary, his name whispered in awe. The 8 antediluvian kings ruled in 5 successive cities for a total period of 241,200 years. An era of unprecedented longevity, a golden age of human existence. Then comes the line that separates 2 eras. The dividing line between the old world and the new. The flood swept the earth. A cataclysmic event, a turning point in human history. After the flood, royalty descends again from heaven, this time to the city of Kish. The beginning of a new era, the dawn of a new civilization. The reigns of the kings after the flood are still long by our standards, but they are much shorter than the antediluvians. The lifespans of the kings diminish after the flood. And as the list progresses in time, the durations become shorter until they reach more recognizable proportions. Time returns to a more human scale. Modern scholars have extensively debated how to interpret these numbers. A topic of endless discussion, a puzzle that remains unsolved. Some consider them purely symbolic, without any relation to real durations. Metaphors for the powers that rule over civilization. Others have proposed that they represent dynasties or lineages rather than individuals, or that the ancient scribes made mistakes when translating figures from one numerical system to another. A reminder that even the most ancient documents can be subject to human error. There are those who suggest that the original durations were written in a decimal system that was later misinterpreted as sexagesimal, which would multiply the figures by a considerable factor. A possible explanation for the staggering numbers. But beyond the debates about numbers, there is something undeniable in the list of Sumerian kings. The text preserved and translated to modern times. It preserves a memory of a previous world, a catastrophe that changed everything, a world where rulers lived impossibly long lives, a world that was erased from the face of the earth and had to begin again. Their experiences would forever be known. If this journey through the most ancient mysteries of humanity is fascinating to you, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. A call to action, an invitation to join a community of seekers. Each week we explore together the secrets that official history prefers to ignore, the questions that archaeology cannot answer, the enigmas that continue to challenge our understanding of the past. Their research is an ongoing process. Your subscription helps us continue to unravel these mysteries in future nights. With their help, they hope to uncover the history of the world. The account of the flood in the Mesopotamian tradition predates by almost 2,000 years the biblical account of Noah. The tradition has roots that are thousands of years old. It is found in multiple versions, including the Genesis of Eridu, the Epopela of Atrajasis, and the famous Epopea of Gilgamesh. The tradition is still known throughout the world. In all these versions, the essential details are consistent. A thread of truth connecting the different accounts. The gods decided to destroy humanity with a flood. A divine judgment, a punishment for human sins. The reasons vary according to the text. In some versions, humans had become too numerous and noisy, disturbing the rest of the gods. A relatable justification. In others, they had committed some moral offense that had to be punished, but a god, Enki, the Wise One, decided to save humanity. Enki was the defender of the Sumerians and the hero of humanity. He secretly warned a righteous man about the imminent catastrophe. The hero of the epic. This man was instructed to build a ship of specific dimensions. The measurements had to be exact. He had to waterproof it with bitumen, load his family and specimens of all living beings on it, and seal the door. A massive task, an act of faith. The rains began, the waters rose. A cataclysm unleashed. The world submerged beneath the waves. For endless days, the flood covered the earth. The disaster lasted for what seemed like an eternity. When the waters finally began to recede, the boat ran aground on a mountain. The hero would soon see the end of his travels. The survivor released birds to determine if dry land had appeared. The hero hoped for a new beginning. Finally, he disembarked and offered a sacrifice to the gods, who gathered around the sweet aroma and promised not to destroy humanity in that way again. The gods vowed to never flood the earth again. The parallels with the biblical account are evident, and scholars have convincingly demonstrated that the Hebrew version derived from the older Mesopotamian versions, adapting them to a monotheistic context. The Hebrew version was based on Sumerian tales. But what interests us here is not the comparison of religious texts. It is the question of what real event, if any, lies behind these narratives. What events might have sparked the legend? This memory of a catastrophic deluge might have inspired a universal recollection. Modern science has indeed confirmed that approximately 11,600 years ago, as the last ice age concluded, a sudden and dramatic climate shift occurred. This period is recognized as the Younger Dryas. The glaciers that blanketed much of the northern hemisphere underwent rapid melting, potentially hastened by comet fragments or changes in ocean patterns. Sea levels surged by over 100 meters in a geologically short period. If any coastal civilization existed before this event, it would have been utterly devastated. Imagine their cities, their bustling ports, and meticulously cultivated fields, all swallowed by the relentless waters. The survivors would have fled inland, carrying only what they could manage, along with haunting memories of a lost world. Göbekli Tepe was constructed precisely during this period, immediately after the Younger Dryas, nestled in the southeastern Turkish mountains, far from the now submerged coastlines. It is plausible that the builders of Göbekli Tepe were refugees from this cataclysm, survivors of a world-ending disaster. Perhaps the intricately carved pillars depicting animals and symbols served as an attempt to preserve knowledge that would otherwise be lost forever. Knowledge gleaned from generations of careful observation and experience. Centuries later, those survivors, or their descendants, descended into the plains of Mesopotamia. There, they established the first cities, carrying with them the collective memory of the deluge. This is what the Sumerians remembered when they spoke of the world before the flood, of the sages who preserved knowledge through the cataclysm, and of the royalty who descended from the heavens, bringing civilization. These weren't mere myths. They were echoes of a past almost too terrible to comprehend. Chapter 7. The Transmission of Knowledge. In the oldest Sumerian texts, a mountain appears repeatedly as a place of profound significance. It is called Duku, the sacred mountain. Duku was described as the abode of the Anunna, the most ancient of gods, predating even the more familiar Anunnaki of later generations. Duku was the birthplace of civilization, the place where agriculture, animal husbandry, and weaving were first established. It was a sanctuary of knowledge, a beacon of innovation in a world shrouded in mystery. Some scholars propose that Duku could be a cultural memory of Göbekli Tepe. The similarities are compelling. Both are elevated locations, sacred mountains, steeped in ancient reverence. Both are associated with the origins of civilization, marking the dawn of human ingenuity. And both predate the Sumerian cities of the alluvial plain by millennia. The linguistic connection is also intriguing. In Turkish, Teep means hill or mound. In Sumerian, du can mean mound or mountain. Göbekli Tepe is situated in the same geographic region where botanical evidence suggests that the domestication of plants began, eventually spreading to Mesopotamia. The oldest known domesticated wheat originates from Mount Karchadag, a mere 30 kilometers from Göbekli Tepe. Could it be that Duku is indeed Göbekli Tepe? If so, the Inanna who dwelled there would be the builders of the temple, the people of the pre-pottery Neolithic period. The Anunnaki, who came later, would be the inheritors of that knowledge, the students who learned from the ancient masters and passed it down through successive generations until it reached Eridu. This interpretation would resolve many paradoxes. It would explain why Sumerian civilization appears so abruptly in the archaeological record, seemingly without a period of gradual development. One moment, there were scattered settlements. The next, a thriving civilization with complex social structures. It would explain why the Sumerians spoke of gods who taught them everything they knew, gods of agriculture, engineering, and law. And it would explain why those gods had even older teachers, sages from before the flood, who had preserved knowledge through the catastrophe, keeping the flame of civilization alive during the darkest of times. The transmission of knowledge across generations is one of the most fundamental aspects of the human experience. Every culture, every civilization builds upon the foundations of what came before. Even when earlier cultures are forgotten, their influence persists in ways we often fail to recognize. The words we use, the numbers we count with, the constellations we name, all bear the imprint of minds that first conceived these concepts thousands of years ago. The Sumerians were acutely aware of this chain of transmission in a way that we often are not. They meticulously recorded lists of sages and kings. They copied ancient texts with scrupulous fidelity, ensuring that the wisdom of the past would not be lost to future generations. They rebuilt temples on the exact foundations of their predecessors, honoring the sacred ground and acknowledging the continuity of their beliefs. They understood that they were heirs to something larger than themselves, guardians of knowledge that had to be preserved for generations to come. And now we are the heirs. When we divide an hour into 60 minutes and a minute into 60 seconds, we are using the Sumerian sexagesimal system, a system born from the Fertile Crescent of Mesopotamia. When we divide a circle into 360 degrees, we are perpetuating a concept that originated on the banks of the Euphrates over 5,000 years ago. When we look at the night sky and recognize the constellations of the zodiac, we are seeing the same patterns that the priests of Eridu observed from the rooftops of their mud-brick temples, reaching out to the cosmos with their minds and spirits. The chain has not been broken. Knowledge has flowed from generation to generation, from culture to culture across millennia. And if the Sumerians were right, that chain extends far further back than our official history acknowledges. It reaches back to the world before the flood, to the sages who emerged from the waters, and to the sacred mountain where it all began, a testament to the enduring power of human ingenuity and the relentless pursuit of knowledge. Innumerable. Chapter 8. The Sexagesimal System and Lost Astronomy. There is an aspect of Sumerian knowledge that has puzzled scholars for over a century. The mathematical system they used, a system that seems too sophisticated to have been developed from scratch. The Sumerians used a sexagesimal numbering system based on the number 60. Not 10 as we use, not 12 as some cultures do, but 60. Why 60? Because 60 is an extraordinarily practical number. It is divisible by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, 30, and 60. No other small number has so many divisors. This system allowed complex calculations to be performed with an ease that our decimal system cannot match in certain contexts. The Sumerians could divide quantities into halves, thirds, quarters, fifths, sixths, and tenths without generating awkward fractions. It was perfect for trade, for the distribution of resources, and for measuring time and space. And here's what's extraordinary. We still use it. An hour has 60 minutes, a minute has 60 seconds, and a circle has 360 degrees, which is 6 times 60. When we look at a clock or use a compass, we are perpetuating mathematical decisions that were made in Mesopotamia more than 5,000 years ago. The Sumerian astronomical knowledge was equally impressive. They had mapped the constellations of the zodiac, those 12 sections of the sky through which the sun, moon, and planets pass. Each constellation occupied 30 degrees of the celestial circle, adding up to the 360 degrees of the complete zodiac. They knew the 5 planets visible to the naked eye and associated them with their main deities. Marduk was Jupiter, Ishtar was Venus, Nergal was Mars, Ninurta was Saturn, and Nabu was Mercury. They could predict the positions of these planets with considerable precision, following cycles they had observed for generations, meticulously recording their movements and patterns. But the most surprising thing about their astronomical knowledge is that they seemed to know about phenomena that would require continuous observations over extraordinarily long periods of time to detect. The precession of the equinoxes is an astronomical phenomenon caused by the slow wobble of the Earth's axis of rotation. This wobble causes the position of the stars in relation to the equinoxes to gradually change over time. A complete precessional cycle takes approximately 26,000 years. To detect precession, you would need to observe the stars for many generations and compare meticulously maintained records. A human lifetime is not enough, not even several lifetimes. You would need an uninterrupted tradition of astronomical observation that spanned millennia, a feat that seems almost impossible for a civilization that supposedly emerged relatively recently. And yet, Mesopotamian texts show knowledge of this phenomenon. They divide the precessional cycle into 12 eras, each of approximately 2,160 years, corresponding to the 12 constellations of the zodiac. They speak of great years that encompass thousands of ordinary years, demonstrating a comprehension of celestial cycles that defies easy explanation. How could they know this? How could civilizations that had supposedly just developed writing possess knowledge that would require continuous observations over periods that exceed their own documented history? One possible answer is that they did not invent this knowledge. They inherited it, received it from teachers who had been observing the heavens for much longer than the Sumerian records encompass. They received it from the Apkallu, the sages of the First World, who had preserved knowledge from before the flood, passing down their astronomical wisdom across the ages. This interpretation would explain why Sumerian astronomical knowledge appears so fully developed from the earliest texts. There was no period of experimentation and gradual development. The system arrived practically complete, as if it had been transmitted from an external source, a gift from a civilization lost to time. The Egyptians also possessed astronomical knowledge that raises similar questions. The pyramids of Giza are aligned with extraordinary precision towards the cardinal points, showcasing a deep understanding of the celestial sphere. The Great Pyramid is oriented to true north with an error of just 3 minutes of arcade, an astonishing feat of engineering and astronomical observation. To achieve this precision without magnetic compasses, the builders must have had a profound knowledge of astronomy, using the stars as their guides. And the 3 main pyramids of Giza, according to some researchers, are arranged in such a way that they replicate the configuration of the 3 stars of Orion's belt, but not as they appeared when the pyramids were built, but as they appeared approximately 12,500 years ago, at the nadir of that constellation's precessional cycle, a perplexing anomaly that challenges conventional understanding. Is this a coincidence, an error of interpretation, or evidence that both the Egyptians and the Sumerians inherited astronomical knowledge from a common source that dates back to times far earlier than their own civilizations? A shared legacy from a forgotten age? We cannot be certain. The evidence is circumstantial, open to multiple interpretations. But the question persists. Where did this knowledge come from? Who developed it first? And how was it transmitted through the millennia to reach the civilizations that first recorded it in writing? The sages of the abyss, according to Mesopotamian tradition, had taught all the arts of knowledge, not only agriculture and construction, but also the observation of the stars, the calculation of time, and the prediction of celestial movements. They were masters of cosmic wisdom, guardians of secrets that spanned ages, their minds reaching out to the farthest reaches of the universe. Perhaps this is just mythology, a fanciful tale to explain the inexplicable. Perhaps the Sumerians simply projected their own achievements into a mythical past, attributing to gods and demigods what they had actually developed themselves through centuries of patient work and observation. Or perhaps there is something more here, a hidden truth buried beneath layers of myth and legend. Perhaps the stories of the Apkallu preserve a genuine memory of real teachers who transmitted knowledge that had been accumulated over countless generations, knowledge of the cosmos and the workings of the universe. Perhaps the first world knew things that we are only just beginning to rediscover, secrets hidden in the stars and the echoes of time. Chapter 9. The Figurines of Mystery. In the deepest levels of the archaeological sites, archaeologists have found objects that have generated decades of speculation and debate. Figurines of baked clay that represent humanoid figures, but with distinctively non-human characteristics. These enigmatic artifacts have captivated researchers and ignited countless theories about their purpose and meaning. The most famous specimens come from the cemetery of Uar and the site of Eridu. They measure between 10 and 15 centimeters in height. They represent standing figures with slender bodies, broad shoulders, and narrow waists. But their heads are elongated, with prominent, oblique eyes that give a reptilian or insectoid appearance. Their mouths are small, almost slit-like, and in some cases, the female figures hold babies with the same non-human characteristics, suggesting a lineage of beings unlike any known to modern science. These figurines have sparked intense debate about their true nature and significance. It has been proposed that these figurines represent deities, spirits, deified ancestors, or simply aesthetic ideals of the Ubaid period, reflections of the beliefs and artistic sensibilities of the people who created them. Some researchers have suggested that the elongated shape of the heads reflects the practice of artificial cranial deformation, which we know was practiced in some later Mesopotamian cultures, a deliberate alteration of the skull to achieve a desired aesthetic or social status. The bands that were placed around the heads of babies to modify their shape would produce elongated skulls similar to those represented in the figurines, providing a plausible explanation for their unusual appearance. But there are aspects of these figurines that do not completely fit with conventional explanations, details that hint at something more mysterious and profound. The oblique and prominent eyes are not consistent with cranial deformation, and the paint markings on many figurines, which appear to represent tattoos or scarifications, suggest specific identities or roles that we have not been able to decipher, adding another layer of complexity to their interpretation. What we know for certain is that these figurines had an important meaning for the Ubaid peoples. They were found in funerary contexts, placed next to the bodies of the deceased, perhaps as guides to the afterlife or protectors of the soul. They were also found in domestic areas, possibly as objects of worship or protection, talismans to ward off evil and ensure good fortune. They were an integral part of the religious and ritual life of a culture that existed more than 7,000 years ago, a culture that has left us with these enigmatic artifacts as a testament to their beliefs and practices. And when we observe these figures with almond-shaped eyes and elongated heads, holding their equally strange-looking babies, we cannot help but wonder what exactly they were representing, what secrets they held within their clay forms. Were they idealized self-portraits, reflections of the Ubaid people's perception of themselves? Were they images of gods, representations of the divine beings they worshipped? Or were they representations of something they had seen, something they had encountered, something that had taught them the secrets of civilization, a glimpse into a world beyond our comprehension? The Subit figurines remain silent, their secrets locked within their ancient forms. Like all the material evidence of these lost cultures, they show us shapes but do not reveal meanings. We can speculate, we can theorize, we can construct plausible narratives, but in the end, we are looking across an abyss of millennia toward minds that thought in ways that we may never fully understand, their motivations and beliefs forever shrouded in the mists of time. With Monaco, Chapter 10. The End of the Period. Ubaid. Around 4000 before our era, the Ubaid culture came to an end. It was not a sudden or violent disappearance, not a catastrophic collapse that wiped them from the face of the earth. It was a gradual transition towards something new, something that archaeologists call the Uruk period, a time of profound transformation and innovation. Uruk, the city that would give its name to an entire era, the first true city in history, with a population that at its peak would reach 40,000 inhabitants or more, a sprawling metropolis that redefined the concept of urban life. The place where cuneiform writing was invented, the dawn of literacy and the preservation of knowledge. The home of the legendary King Gilgamesh, whose epic would become one of the oldest and most influential literary works of humanity. a timeless tale of heroism, friendship, and the search for immortality. The Uruk period represents a qualitative leap in social complexity, a radical shift in the organization and structure of human societies. The villages and small cities of the Ubaid period gave way to massive urban centers with monumental architecture on a scale without precedent, testaments to the ambition and ingenuity of the Uruk people. Temples grew into enormous complexes that dominated the horizon, towering structures that symbolized the power of the gods and the central role of religion in Uruk society. Palaces appeared, symbols of royal authority and administrative power, along with vast administrative buildings and warehouses to redistribute agricultural surpluses, ensuring the stability and prosperity of the growing population. And most significantly, writing appeared, a revolutionary innovation that transformed human communication and knowledge preservation. First as simple accounting marks on clay tablets, recording quantities of grain, heads of cattle, and jars of oil, the mundane details of daily life meticulously documented, then gradually evolving into a system capable of expressing abstract ideas, narrating stories, and preserving memory for posterity, opening up new avenues for human thought and expression. The Sumerians, the people whose language would become the first written language in history, emerged during this period. Their origin remains a mystery, a puzzle that has confounded scholars for generations. Sumerian is not related to any other known language, an enigma in the world of linguistics. It is not Semitic like Akkadian, Hebrew, or Arabic. It is not Indo-European, like English, Spanish, or Hindi. It is a linguistic isolate, a relic of a past so remote that all related languages have disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only this enigmatic tongue. Some scholars have proposed that the Sumerians were descendants of the Subaid peoples, that their language had evolved in the marshes of the south during millennia of relative isolation, adapting and transforming over countless generations. Others suggest that they came from somewhere outside Mesopotamia, bringing with them a language that was already fully formed, a distinct and independent linguistic tradition. The archaeological evidence does not resolve the debate definitively, leaving the question of Sumerian origins shrouded in uncertainty. What we do know is that when written history begins around 3200 before our era, the Sumerians were already firmly established in southern Mesopotamia, their civilization in full bloom. They had built impressive cities, developed sophisticated systems of administration, created works of art of extraordinary beauty, and looked back towards a mythical past that extended far beyond their own era, a past filled with gods, heroes, and cataclysmic events. They spoke of Eridu as the first city, the cradle of civilization where the arts and sciences were first discovered. They spoke of the 7 sages who had brought civilization, Apkallu, who imparted wisdom and knowledge to humanity. They spoke of the flood that had swept away a previous world, a catastrophic event that reshaped the course of history. They spoke of kings who had ruled for tens of thousands of years before the catastrophe, legendary figures who possessed superhuman powers and wisdom. Were they inventing myths to explain their own origin, creating stories to legitimize their power and provide a sense of identity? Or were they preserving genuine memories of real events that dated back to unthinkable times, echoes of a distant past that has been largely lost to the ravages of time? Chapter 11. The Echo of the First World. We have traveled through millennia, journeying across vast stretches of time. We have followed the trail of cultures that left no written texts, cultures that we know only from their material remains, the fragments of their lives preserved in the earth. We have explored mounds of rubble, under which lie the foundations of temples that were rebuilt generation after generation, sacred places that have been venerated for thousands of years. For more than 15 years, we have contemplated figurines with almond-shaped eyes, enigmatic artifacts that hold secrets that they will likely never reveal, prompting us to question the nature of humanity and the origins of civilization. And at the end of this journey, we arrive at an understanding that is both humbling and astonishing, a realization that challenges our conventional view of history. Human civilization is much older than our traditional textbooks suggest, its roots reaching far deeper into the past than we previously imagined. There is a first world that preceded everything we call history, a forgotten era that predates our current understanding of civilization. A world of monumental temples built by hunter-gatherers who should not have been able to build them, defying our assumptions about the capabilities of early humans. A world of sophisticated cultures that extended across immense regions, their influence shaping the course of human development in ways that we are only beginning to understand. A world that was erased by climatic catastrophes, a series of devastating events that wiped out entire civilizations and forced the survivors to start anew. The Sumerians did not invent civilization. They inherited it, received a legacy from a forgotten age. They were the custodians of knowledge, entrusted with preserving the wisdom of the past and passing it on to future generations. That came from something earlier, and that something earlier might have, in turn, inherited knowledge from even more remote sources. The chain of music, transmission is lost in the mists of time, stretching back beyond our capacity to see. Clearly, music. But there are echoes, there are resonances. The T-shaped pillars of Göbekli Tepe resemble the stelae of Sumer. Serpent and scorpion motifs appear in both places. The concept of a temple rebuilt time and again on the same sacred site is found. Music in both Göbekli Tepe and Eridu. These are threads connecting eras, separated by millennia, hints of a continuity that archaeologists are only just beginning to glimpse. Music. Before our journey comes to a close, I'd love to know what other mysteries of antiquity you'd like to explore in future nights. Are you intrigued by the origins of the builders of Stonehenge, the secrets of the music, lost cultures of the Indus Valley, or perhaps the civilizations that may have existed in the Amazon before the conquest? Your suggestions will guide our next expeditions into the past. Leave them music in the comments and, together, let's see what secrets still await. Revelation. The question that remains is perhaps the most important of all. What did we lose when the first world vanished? Music. What knowledge? What techniques? What understandings of the universe and of ourselves were erased by the floodwaters, by the inexorable passage of time, by the oblivion of generations that no longer remembered what their ancestors had known? The Sumerians believed that the Apkallu had preserved the essentials, that the wisdom of the previous world had been transmitted through the catastrophe and given to humanity so that it could rebuild. But even they recognized that something had been lost. The antediluvian kings had lived for tens of thousands of years. The post-diluvian kings barely reached centuries. Something had fundamentally changed. The direct link to the divine had weakened. Humanity had been diminished. Perhaps this is just mythology. Perhaps it's just the way that humans make sense of the passage of time, always imagining a golden age in the distant past when everything was better, when heroes walked among us, when the gods spoke directly to mortals. Or perhaps there is some truth to these accounts. Perhaps there was a time when humans knew things that we have since forgotten. Perhaps the stone temples of Göbekli Tepe were built by people who understood principles that we are still trying to rediscover. Perhaps the sages of the Sumerian texts were not just mythological figures but distorted memories of real teachers whose names and faces are lost but whose teachings survived. We have no definitive answers. We only have music questions, fragmentary evidence, clues that point to mysteries that we may never fully solve. But that's what makes this journey so fascinating. We are exploring the limits of the known, peering into the abyss of time, trying to glimpse the blurred shapes of a world that existed before there were words to describe it. Chapter 12. The legacy we live. There is a paradox in our relationship with the remote past. On the one hand, we feel utterly music separated from it. The cultures we've explored this evening existed thousands of years ago. They had no writing, no technologies that we take for granted. They didn't think in the ways we think. They are strangers' music to us. Temporal aliens whose motivations and beliefs we can barely imagine. And yet we are their heirs. Everything we are was built on foundations that they laid. The cities in which we live are descendants of music, the first cities that emerged on the plains of Mesopotamia. The writing systems with which we record our thoughts evolved from marks that Sumerian scribes pressed into damp clay. The calendars with which we measure our days derive from observations that priests from mud-brick temples made gazing at the night sky. When we divide an hour into 60 minutes, we are perpetuating the Sumerian sexagesimal system. When we recognize the constellations of the zodiac, we are seeing the sky through Mesopotamian eyes. When we speak of floods and destructions, of lost worlds and golden ages, we are repeating narratives that were first told on the banks of the Euphrates more than 4,000 years ago. The chain of transmission has not been broken. Knowledge has flowed from generation to generation, transforming, adapting, but never disappearing completely. And that chain extends further back than we ever imagine. It extends to Göbekli Tepe, to the Halaf and Hassuna cultures, to the mysterious builders of the first world. Every time we learn something new, every time we discover a technique or formulate an idea, we are adding links to that chain. Music. We are building on the work of all who came before, and someday, in a future we cannot foresee, others will build upon what we leave behind. The Apkallu, if they ever existed, as real beings, understood this. They understood that knowledge is precious, that it can be easily lost, that it must be actively preserved and transmitted. That's why they taught, that's why the Sumerians so meticulously recorded the lists, music of sages and kings. That's why they copied ancient texts with scrupulous fidelity. They knew they were guardians of something larger than themselves. We too are guardians, each of us, simply by existing, by thinking, by communicating with others, are participating in the great chain of transmission that connects the remote past with the distant future. We are heirs of the first world, even if we don't know its name, and we will be ancestors of future worlds that cannot yet imagine us. Chapter 13. Music. The silence of the ruins. The ruins of Eridu still stand under the scorching sun of southern Iraq. The unfinished ziggurat rises above a landscape of sand and scrub, a monument to ambitions that were abandoned more than 4,000 years ago. Beneath the sun-baked bricks, the deepest levels of excavation still hold secrets that archaeologists have not fully unraveled. Göbekli Tepe also remains nestled in the mountains of southeastern Turkey. Only a small fraction of the site has been excavated. Ground-penetrating radar reveals buried structures that we likely won't see unearthed in our lifetimes. The T-shaped music pillars gaze at the sky with their stone eyes, guarding the silence. Music they've guarded for 12,000 years. The clay tablets that record Sumerian myths are scattered in museums around the world. The Weld-Blundell prism music rests in Oxford. The flood tablets are in London. The cylinder seals, the UR figurines, the halaf pottery fragments, all await music in illuminated display cases, offering fragments of a story that we may never fully reconstruct. There's a kind of knowledge that can only be gained from silence, from the act of contemplating something very old and allowing the vastness of time to wash over us. The people who built these places lived lives as real as our own. They had fears and hopes, loves and losses, moments of joy and despair. They looked at the same sun that we look at. They walked under the same stars, and then they disappeared, leaving only stones and clay shards to tell their story. We too, music, will disappear someday. The buildings we build will become ruins. The texts we write will become indecipherable to future readers. The names of our leaders and artists will be forgotten, as were the names of the builders of Göbekli Tepe. It's the nature of time. Consumes everything we touch. But something, music, remains. Something always remains. The chain of transmission continues. Knowledge flows forward, transforming, but never completely fading away. What the people of the first world discovered, what the Sumerians preserved, what the generations in between transmitted, all of that lives on in us. We are the living legacy of worlds that no longer exist. And when we look back, trying to glimpse the first world through the fog of time, we are not just satisfying historical curiosity. We are reconnecting with our own roots. We are remembering who we are and where we come from. We are honoring the ancestors who made us possible. When the archaeologist Klaus Schmidt died in 2014, he left a legacy that transformed our understanding of human prehistory. But he also left a music question that he himself could never answer. Why? Why music did hunter-gatherers who had barely developed agriculture invest incalculable resources in building stone monuments that served no apparent practical purpose? Why did they carve animals onto pillars that they then deliberately buried? Why did they create a place that seems to have been designed to endure for millennia? Schmidt believed the answer had to do with religion, with the human need to create sacred spaces. Music, where the mundane could meet the transcendent. First came the temple, then the music city, he said. Spirituality, not economics, was the engine that drove the first steps toward civilization. But this answer, only music, shifts the question. Where did that spirituality come from? What experiences, what visions, what music encounters with the luminous drove those hunter-gatherers? Music to embark on a project that would outlive them for millennia? There are researchers who have proposed bolder theories. Some suggest that Göbekli Tepe was built to commemorate a catastrophic event. Perhaps the impact of fragments, music, of a comet that caused the cooling period known as the Younger Dryas. The animal sculptures could be representations of constellations, and certain pillars might encode astronomical information about the music date of the cataclysm. Others have noted that one of the reliefs seems to show music headless figures surrounded by vultures. In many ancient cultures, the exposure of the bodies of the dead to scavenging birds was a funerary practice known as excarnation. Was Göbekli Tepe a place of ancestor worship where the bones of the deceased were venerated after the flesh had been consumed by birds? The Sumerians' music had their own answer. They said that the sages had come from the water, bringing with them the gifts of civilization. They said that before the flood, there had existed a different world, a world of long-lived kings and lost knowledge. They said that everything they knew was a legacy of that first world. They were right. There was something before Göbekli Tepe. There was a lost civilization whose survivors built temples in the mountains to preserve what remained of their knowledge. Or were the Sumerians simply mythologizing the natural process by which humanity gradually developed the tools of culture? We don't know. We probably never will know for sure. The mysteries of the first world will remain mysteries, challenging our certainty, inviting us to speculate, reminding us that there are vast regions of the human past that remain unexplored. But that's okay. Mysteries have their own value. They keep us humble. They remind us that no matter how much we learn, there will always be more that we don't know. They invite us to keep searching, to keep questioning, to keep exploring the limits of the known. The first world existed. Of that we can be sure. It existed long before anyone wrote the word history. It existed in the mountains of Anatolia and in the marshes of Mesopotamia. Music. It existed in the hearts and minds of people who no longer have names, but whose music acts resonated through millennia, and we are their heirs. We carry within us echoes of their dreams, fragments of their knowledge, footprints of their steps through a world that has changed beyond all recognition, but that remains fundamentally the same world under the same stars. The moon that illuminates your window. Tonight music is the same moon that the builders of Göbekli Tepe music observed 12,000 years ago. The constellations that turn in the sky are the same ones that the priests of Eridu named and studied. Time passes, civilizations rise and fall, but the cosmos remains indifferent to our little lives, and yet it bears witness to all that we have been and all that we will be. The first world left us more than we know. It left us the capacity to wonder about it, to seek it among ruins and fragments, to weave narratives that connect the present music with the remote past. It left us the curiosity that makes us human, the need to know where we come from in order to understand where we are going. And perhaps that is enough. Perhaps we don't need all the answers. Perhaps the journey is more music important than the destination, and the search more valuable than the finding. Perhaps the mystery of the first world music is a gift, a perpetual invitation to keep exploring, to keep imagining, to keep connecting with music ancestors whose voices have been lost, but whose legacy lives on in us. The stones of Göbekli Tepe music will continue to guard their silence. The ruins of Eridu will continue to wait under the desert sun. The Sumerian tablets will continue to tell stories, music of floods and sages and long-lived kings. And we will keep asking, searching, music, dreaming of the first world, because that's what humans do. That's what we've always done, from the first who carved pillars in the mountains to the last who will write words that have not yet been invented. We are the guardians of memory, the transmitters of knowledge, the heirs of the first world and the ancestors of future worlds. And tonight, music in this moment, we are part of that chain that connects all that was with all that will be. We are the present link in a chain that stretches back to the dawn of humanity and forward to the end of time. This is what it means to be human. This is what it means to belong to history. This is what it means to inherit the first world. That primordial world, a lost Eden perhaps, had gifted its wisdom to those who came after, wisdom that trickled down through the ages, sometimes a clear stream, other times a mere dampness in the soil. Even those inheritors of that inheritance, the Sumerians, could not claim true authorship. They were recipients, scribes preserving what they could from a text already faded and torn. And where did the knowledge of that first world truly come from? Could it have originated from a source even more ancient, a civilization now utterly lost to time, its cities ground to dust, its language unheard? The thought danced and tantalized, a suggestion whispered on the wind. The chain of transmission, that invisible cord linking past to present, dissolves into the mists of prehistory, receding into a realm beyond our clear sight, beyond the reach of our most sophisticated instruments. Music. And yet, echoes remain. Resonances vibrate within the stone, within the stories we tell ourselves. The T-shaped pillars of Göbekli Tepe, those silent sentinels of the dawn of civilization, bear a striking resemblance to the stele of Sumer, erected millennia later in a different land. Serpent and scorpion motifs, primal symbols of power and mystery, slither and sting in the art of both cultures. The very idea of a temple, a sacred precinct rebuilt time and again on the same hallowed ground, persists from Göbekli Tepe to Eridu, the cradle of Sumerian civilization. Music. They are threads, gossamer yet unbreakable, connecting eras rent asunder by vast gulfs of time. They are whispers of a continuity that eludes our grasp, a connection that archaeologists are only now, blinking with wonder, beginning to perceive. And as our journey through the shadowed corridors of the past nears its end, I find myself yearning to know what other enigmatic corners of antiquity you, my fellow travelers, would wish to explore on future evenings. Music. Does the enigma of Stonehenge beckon, those silent megaliths standing guard over secrets yet untold? Do you seek to unravel the mysteries of the Indus Valley, a civilization swallowed by the sands of time, its cities whispering tales of advanced planning and intricate artistry? Or perhaps you dream of venturing into the emerald heart of the Amazon, searching for traces of civilizations that flourished before the arrival of the conquistadors, their knowledge now veiled by the dense foliage and rushing waters? Your suggestions, your curiosities, will shape our future explorations, guiding our steps as we venture deeper into the forgotten realms of what came before. Share your desires in the comments below, and together, let us unveil the secrets that still lie slumbering, awaiting our gaze. Music. But before we embark on new quests, one question remains, perhaps the most vital of all. What exactly did we lose when the first world, whatever its name and form, vanished from the face of the earth? Music. What profound understanding of the universe, what mastery of forgotten arts, what knowledge of ourselves was swept away by the cataclysmic flood, ground into dust by the relentless march of time, and banished to the oblivion of generations who no longer remembered what their ancestors had known. The Sumerians, those inheritors of a shattered world, clung to the belief that the Apkallu, the semi-divine sages who emerged from the primordial waters, had salvaged the essential knowledge, transmitting the wisdom of the pre-Diluvian age through the chaos and devastation, gifting it to a fledgling humanity so that it could rebuild. Yet, even the Sumerians, with their reverence for the past, acknowledged that something precious had been irretrievably lost. The antediluvian kings, those godlike figures who reigned before the Great Flood, lived for tens of thousands of years, their lifespans mirroring the vastness of the cosmos itself. But the kings who followed the deluge, those mere mortals struggling to rebuild civilization, barely lived for centuries, their lives flickering like candles in the face of eternity. Something fundamental had shifted. The direct line to the divine, the unbroken connection to the source of all creation, had been severed. Music, humanity, once walking hand in hand with the gods, had been diminished, cast down from its celestial perch. Perhaps, of course, this is merely mythology, a comforting narrative woven to soothe the human soul. Perhaps it is simply the way we, as humans, attempt to impose order upon the chaos of time, forever yearning for a mythical golden age in the distant past, a time when everything was brighter, sharper, more real, a time when heroes walked among us, their deeds echoing with divine purpose, and when the gods themselves spoke directly to mortals, offering guidance and wisdom. And yet, perhaps there is a kernel of truth buried within these ancient tales, a whisper of reality echoing through the ages. Perhaps there was a time when humanity possessed knowledge that has since been forgotten, skills that have been lost to the mists of time. Perhaps the enigmatic stone temples of Göbekli Tepe, those silent sentinels of a forgotten age, were erected by a people who understood principles that we are still desperately trying to rediscover. Perhaps the sages of the Sumerian texts, those enigmatic figures who emerged from the waters, were not merely mythological archetypes, but distorted memories of real teachers, master craftsmen, and wise leaders whose names and faces have been lost to the unforgiving currents of time, but whose teachings somehow endured, carried on the winds of memory. We have no definitive answers, no absolute truths to offer. We possess only tantalizing questions, fragmented pieces of evidence scattered across the archaeological landscape, and a multitude of tantalizing clues that point toward mysteries that may never be fully resolved. Music. But it is precisely this lack of certainty, this tantalizing dance on the edge of the unknown, that makes this journey so utterly fascinating. We are explorers charting uncharted waters, daring to venture into the uncharted territories of the human past. We are peering into the abyss of time, straining our eyes to discern the blurred outlines of a world that existed before words were invented to describe it, before history was even conceived. Chapter 12. The Legacy We Inhabit. There exists a profound paradox at the heart of our relationship with the remote past, a tension between separation and connection, between alienation and inheritance. On the one hand, we can feel utterly disconnected, irrevocably severed from the cultures that flourished millennia ago. Music, those ancient peoples, who walked the earth thousands of years before our time, possessed a worldview so fundamentally different from our own. They lacked the tools and technologies that we take for granted, the comforts and conveniences that define our modern lives. They did not possess writing, nor did they adhere to the same systems of logic and belief that shape our thoughts and actions. They are, in essence, strangers to us, temporal aliens whose motivations and beliefs we can only dimly perceive, whose very existence feels like a distant dream. And yet, we are undeniably their heirs. Every aspect of our modern civilization, from the grandest monument to the simplest tool, is built upon the foundations that they laid, brick by painstaking brick. The bustling cities in which we dwell, with their towering skyscrapers and intricate networks of infrastructure, are direct descendants of the first urban settlements that emerged on the fertile plains of Mesopotamia. Those mud-brick villages that blossomed into centers of trade, innovation, and cultural exchange. Music, the very writing systems with which we record our thoughts, communicate our ideas, and preserve our history evolved from the simple marks and symbols that Sumerian scribes painstakingly pressed into damp clay, scratching out the first tentative attempts at written language. The calendars that we use to measure the passage of our days, to mark the changing of the seasons, and to structure our lives derive from the meticulous observations that priests in ancient mud-brick temples made, gazing up at the night sky, tracking the movements of the stars, and divining meaning from the celestial dance. Even when we casually divide an hour into 60 minutes, we are perpetuating the legacy of the Sumerian sexagesimal system, a mathematical framework that has endured for over 4,000 years, shaping our understanding of time and space. And when we gaze upon the constellations of the zodiac, those familiar patterns of stars that adorn the night sky, we are, in essence, seeing the universe through Mesopotamian eyes, inheriting a cosmic map that was first charted by the ancient stargazers of Sumer. When we speak of devastating floods, of apocalyptic destructions, of lost worlds and golden ages, we are echoing narratives that were first told on the banks of the Euphrates River more than 4,000 years ago, stories that have been passed down through generations, evolving and adapting, yet retaining their essential power. Music, the chain of transmission, that invisible thread connecting past to present, has never been broken. Knowledge, like a river, has flowed ceaselessly from generation to generation, transforming, adapting, and branching into countless streams, but never disappearing entirely. And that river, that chain, stretches back further than we can ever truly imagine, beyond the dawn of recorded history, into the twilight of prehistory. It extends to Göbekli Tepe, those enigmatic stone circles nestled in the mountains of Turkey, a testament to the ingenuity and spiritual yearning of a people who lived on the cusp of civilization. It stretches to the Halaf and Hassuna cultures, those early farming communities who laid the groundwork for the urban revolution that would transform the face of Mesopotamia. It stretches, impossibly, to the mysterious builders of the First World, a civilization shrouded in mystery, its knowledge now fragmented and obscured by the mists of time. Each time we learn something new, each time we discover a new technique, each time we formulate a new idea, we are, in effect, adding links to that unbroken chain, building upon the work of all those who came before us, carrying forward the torch of knowledge. Music. We are standing on the shoulders of giants, benefiting from the wisdom and ingenuity of countless generations who have toiled and dreamed before us. And someday, in a future that we cannot foresee, others will build upon the foundations that we have laid, continuing the long and arduous journey of human progress. The Apkallu, those semi-divine sages of Sumerian legend, if they ever existed as real beings, understood this fundamental truth. They understood that knowledge is precious, a fragile and vulnerable thing that can be easily lost, that must be actively preserved, cherished, and transmitted from one generation to the next. That is why they taught, sharing their wisdom and expertise with those who came after. That is why the Sumerians meticulously recorded the lists of sages and kings, preserving the names and deeds of those who had shaped their civilization. That is why they painstakingly copied ancient texts, striving to maintain scrupulous fidelity to the original source, recognizing that they were the custodians of something far larger than themselves. We, too, are guardians of that ancient flame. Each and every one of us, simply by existing, by thinking, by communicating with others, is participating in the grand chain of transmission that connects the remote past with the distant future, weaving our own threads into the tapestry of human history. We are, whether we realize it or not, the heirs of the first world, even if we do not know its name or fully understand its secrets. And we will, in turn, become the ancestors of future worlds, worlds that cannot yet imagine us, worlds that will build upon the legacy that we leave behind. Chapter 13. Music, the Silence of the Ruins. The ruins of Eridu still stand, baking under the relentless sun of southern Iraq, silent witnesses to the ebb and flow of time. The unfinished ziggurat, a towering monument to human ambition, rises above a desolate landscape of sand and scrub, a testament to dreams abandoned more than 4,000 years ago, its secrets buried beneath layers of sun-baked bricks. The deepest levels of excavation, shrouded in mystery and silence, still hold secrets that archaeologists have yet to fully unravel, tantalizing glimpses into a past that remains stubbornly out of reach. Göbekli Tepe, too, endures, nestled amidst the rolling mountains of southeastern Turkey, its enigmatic stone circles whispering tales of a dawn age of humankind. Only a small fraction of this extraordinary site has been excavated, its secrets shielded from the prying eyes of the modern world. Ground-penetrating radar reveals the existence of buried structures, chambers, and monoliths that we will likely never see unearthed in our lifetimes. Their mysteries destined to remain locked within the earth. The T-shaped pillars, adorned with stylized carvings of animals and abstract symbols, gaze silently at the sky, their stone eyes guarding the secrets they have guarded for over 12,000 years, their silence a profound testament to the enduring power of the past. Music, and scattered across the globe, in museums and private collections, lie the clay tablets that record the myths, legends, and histories of Sumer, fragments of a lost civilization that offer tantalizing glimpses into a world both familiar and utterly alien. The Weld Blundell Prism, a six-sided clay tablet inscribed with a list of Sumerian kings, rests in the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, its cuneiform script a silent symphony of forgotten sounds. Music, the flood tablets, bearing the story of the great deluge that swept across the ancient world, are housed in the British Museum in London, their epic tale echoing across the millennia. The cylinder seals, the UR figurines, the Halaf pottery fragments, all await their turn in illuminated display cases, offering tantalizing fragments of a story that we may never be able to fully reconstruct, pieces of a puzzle that will forever remain incomplete. There is a unique kind of knowledge, a profound understanding, that can only be acquired from silence, from the solitary act of contemplating something ancient, something that has witnessed the ebb and flow of time, and allowing the vastness of history to wash over you. The people who built these places, who carved these stones, who wrote these stories, lived lives as real and as vibrant as our own. They experienced the same joys and sorrows, the same hopes and fears, the same loves and losses that define the human condition. They gazed upon the same sun that warms our faces, walked beneath the same stars that illuminate our nights, and dreamed the same dreams that flicker in our minds. And yet, they disappeared, vanished into the mists of time, leaving behind only stones and clay shards to tell their story, fragments of a civilization that has been irrevocably lost. And we, too, will one day disappear. Music, the buildings we construct, the monuments we erect, will crumble into ruins, swallowed by the inexorable march of time. The texts we write, the stories we tell, will become indecipherable to future readers, their meanings lost to the sands of oblivion. The names of our leaders, our artists, our thinkers will fade from memory, forgotten as were the names of the builders of Göbekli Tepe, their identities lost to the endless currents of time. It is the inevitable nature of time, a relentless force that consumes all that we touch, grinding even the grandest achievements into dust. But something remains. Music. Something always remains. The chain of transmission, though frayed and worn, continues unbroken, stretching from the remote past to the distant future. Knowledge, like a river, flows ever onward, transforming, adapting, and evolving, but never completely vanishing. What the people of the first world discovered, the insights they gleaned, the wisdom they acquired, what the Sumerians so diligently preserved, the stories they so meticulously recorded, what the generations in between transmitted, nurtured, and added to, all of that lives on in us, echoing in our thoughts, shaping our actions, and guiding our steps. We are, in essence, the living legacy of worlds that no longer exist, the inheritors of a past that stretches back to the very dawn of civilization. And when we look back, striving to glimpse the first world through the fog of time, we are not simply satisfying a fleeting curiosity, not merely engaging in an academic exercise. We are reconnecting with our own roots, delving into the wellspring of our shared humanity, and remembering who we are and where we come from. We are honoring the ancestors who made us possible, acknowledging the sacrifices they made, and paying tribute to the knowledge they preserved. When the archaeologist Klaus Schmidt, the man who brought Göbekli Tepe to the world's attention, died unexpectedly in 2014, he left behind a legacy that transformed our understanding of human prehistory, forcing us to rethink our assumptions about the origins of civilization. But he also left behind a haunting question, a riddle that he himself could never fully answer. Music. Why? Why did hunter-gatherers, living on the cusp of agriculture, invest incalculable resources in building monumental structures made of stone, structures that served no apparent practical purpose? Why did they carve stylized animals onto massive pillars, only to deliberately bury them beneath the earth, concealing their creations from the eyes of the world? Why did they create a place that seems to have been designed to endure for millennia, a testament to a vision that transcends the fleeting concerns of everyday life? Schmidt believed that the answer lay in the realm of religion, in the human need to create sacred spaces, to establish a connection with the divine, to find meaning and purpose beyond the mundane concerns of survival. Music. First came the temple, then the city, he famously declared, arguing that spirituality, rather than economics, was the driving force behind the first steps toward civilization, the spark that ignited the flame of human progress. But this answer, compelling as it is, merely shifts the question one step further back. Where did that spirituality come from? What experiences, what visions, what music encounters with the numinous and the transcendent inspired those hunter-gatherers to embark on a project that would outlive them by millennia, a testament to a belief that defied the limitations of their material circumstances? Some researchers have proposed more audacious theories, pushing the boundaries of conventional archaeological interpretation. Some suggest that Göbekli Tepe was built to commemorate a catastrophic event, perhaps the impact of fragments music of a comet that triggered the Younger Dryas, a period of abrupt climate change that plunged the ancient world into a mini-ice age. The animal sculptures, they argue, may be representations of constellations, marking the celestial alignment that coincided with the cataclysmic impact. Certain pillars, they contend, might even encode astronomical information, pinpointing the precise date and time of the event. Others have focused on a particular relief, a haunting depiction of a headless figure surrounded by vultures, suggesting a connection to ancient funerary practices. Music. In many ancient cultures, the exposure of the bodies of the dead to scavenging birds was a ritual known as excarnation, a practice designed to strip the flesh from the bones, allowing the spirit to ascend to the heavens. Was Göbekli Tepe, then, a place of ancestor worship, a sanctuary where the bones of the deceased were venerated after the flesh had been consumed by the birds, a testament to the enduring power of kinship and lineage? The Sumerians, for their part, had their own explanation, a story that resonated with their understanding of the world. They said that the Apkallu, those semi-divine sages who emerged from the waters, brought with them the gifts of civilization, bestowing upon humanity the knowledge of agriculture, architecture, and the arts. They said that before the Great Flood, a cataclysmic event that reshaped the face of the earth, there had existed a different world, a world of long-lived kings and lost knowledge, a golden age that was swept away by the floodwaters. They said that everything they knew, every skill they possessed, every story they told, was a legacy of that first world, a precious inheritance passed down through the generations. And they were right, weren't they? Music. There was something before Göbekli Tepe, something that paved the way for the rise of civilization. There was a lost civilization, perhaps more advanced than we can imagine, whose survivors built temples in the mountains, striving to preserve what remained of their knowledge, clinging to the fading embers of a dying world. Or were the Sumerians simply mythologizing the natural process by which humanity gradually developed the tools of culture, embellishing the story of their origins with tales of divine intervention and lost civilizations? We do not know, and perhaps we will never know for certain. The mysteries of the first world will likely remain mysteries, shrouded in the mists of time, challenging our assumptions, inviting us to speculate, and reminding us that there are vast regions of the human past that remain unexplored, waiting to be discovered. But that is all right. Mysteries have their own inherent value, humbling us, reminding us that no matter how much we learn, there will always be more that we do not know, inviting us to continue seeking, to continue questioning, to continue exploring the limits of the known, pushing the boundaries of human understanding. The first world existed. Of that we can be certain. It existed long before anyone wrote the word history, long before the invention of writing, long before the dawn of recorded time. It existed in the mountains of Anatolia, in the Fertile Crescent of Mesopotamia, in countless other places that we have yet to discover. Music. It existed in the hearts and minds of people who no longer have names, people whose stories have been lost to the sands of time, but whose acts, whose dreams, whose knowledge resonated across millennia, shaping the world in ways that we can only dimly perceive. And we are their heirs, the inheritors of their legacy. We carry within us echoes of their dreams, fragments of their knowledge, footprints of their journeys through a world that has changed beyond all recognition, but that remains fundamentally the same world, under the same stars, bathed in the same moonlight. The moon that shines through your window tonight, casting its ethereal glow upon the world, is the same moon that the builders of Göbekli Tepe gazed upon 12,000 years ago, drawing inspiration from its celestial presence. Music, the constellations that will across the night sky, those ancient patterns of stars that have guided sailors and shepherds for millennia, are the same ones that the priests of Eridu named and studied,